Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be doing another painting over my sketches video. This time it's gonna be a little bit different in that we're gonna try and redo a scene from Sleeping Beauty. If you guys might remember the last video in the series, I asked for recommendations on which one to do next. I'm still gonna do that, but I just wanted to do this one after I watched the movie again. This is sort of my own personal video that I want to do. The next one, I think, is gonna be Wednesday, but for now we're focusing on Aurora for Sleeping Beauty. And like before, I'm using my Holbein gouache just until I can get another Himi gouache set, because I want to eventually do this whole series in just my Mia gouache, just because I don't want to waste that much of my Holbeins, since these sketches are going to be on my sketchbook anyway. The brushes I'm using is what's more exciting, I think. These are a bunch of the Princeton Velvet Touch brushes I'm going to use, and for the finer details, I'm going to go ahead and switch to my Kolinsky Sable brush, which is one of my new favorite brushes to use for this. Like before, this sketch is also done with my red ballpoint pen, and I actually think I did the sketch twice before I got to this one. Translating the look from the scene I pulled from the actual movie was the real challenge for me. I sort of had to decide which things I needed to tweak to fit my style more, and eventually I got to this sketch. The skin tones for this are a mix of my blues and also Jaune Brilliant #1. I still don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that one instead of my peachy skin tone. I really want her to have this kind of warmth, and since I'm gonna use the blue anyway, I think it's gonna even things out. I'm using mostly warm colors for her skin, and that's because when I was going through inspiration for the color palette for this, I actually came across the live Cinderella movie, which is what I had initially wanted for the color scheme. So for her skin, it's a lot of colors that I pulled from that, but then eventually I did have to readjust that to fit the background more. But yeah, that is what I initially went for. I think that her skin tone actually went surprisingly well, which is what I had expected to struggle with the most. For this painting, I'm more excited to do the background than her, which is a first for me. Usually there's a lot of times where I would need to spend more effort in the background, just because that is usually what I struggle with the most. But for this one, I wanted to get her done first and fast, so I can eventually get to the background. If you've seen the movie, that is one of the things that really stand out. It's just those gorgeous painted backgrounds. I actually rewatched the movie again, and I was surprised at how jarring the difference is between the first scenes in, I think it was in the kingdom or in the castle scenes. I think they were done in the same meticulous way that the forest scenes were, and I actually think they were done by the same people, but it was jarring to see how much different they look. Maybe it's just in the color palette, but really stuck to me how different the color palettes are. There's so many contrasting colors in that scene, and I don't know, it just wasn't as pleasing as the forest scenes. And I guess maybe when I think back to the movie, those are all that I remember, because for a lot of the movie, that's where they spend the most time on. But it was just surprising to see how different the effect was, going from the very triadic, I think, color schemes in the kingdom scenes. I'm not sure if that was the intended effect, but it just felt much more calm and sort of subdued in a beautiful way in the forest versus how it was in the kingdom. and much of it has to do with the background. The characters in general remain the same, they are just overlaid in different scenes. So that's why I was really anxious to get to the background. I was so excited to paint those forests and the tree trunks especially. I don't know if you guys have seen that video they had where 4 artists paint one tree, but I was really fascinated by the fact that they all chose to focus on different parts of the tree, and the main artist for Sleeping Beauty really highlighted the textures in the tree trunk. So that's what I really wanted to get on with this one. Because of how restricted I did the format, in the movie it's this really beautiful scenic horizontal scene, and you can really see the shapes of the trees, which they played around with, and they did in a very stylistic way. Since I couldn't do that for this one, and I decided to crop the scene into this vertical framing that's really just cropped mostly around her, I couldn't get to those different silhouettes that they were going for, and so I would have to focus on the textures in these trees. I knew right away that that was going to take a lot of time, and so I wanted to get on with it. I actually think that's one of the main reasons why this painting worked, is because I didn't give myself enough time to overthink her. When you look at how I did the face, it's really not that much different from the animated way that they did hers in the movie. I think it's very far from being realistic, which is what I had initially wanted to do, and if I had done that, it would have taken much more time. And now I'm very happy that I didn't focus too much on it. I really just wanted to play around with the colors that are on her, maybe just add a little bit more depth to the ones that they already chose. The main goal for this is not to make a painting that is quote-unquote better than the scenes, because I know if I tried to do that, I would never succeed and would probably end up with a painting that I'm not happy with, because that is just too much pressure. I guess the goal for this painting in general is just to really just draw the same scene in a style that feels more my own, similarly to how those different artists chose to paint one tree in very different ways. The color of her outfit really stumped me. It was easy enough to paint it initially. At this stage it was easy because it was mostly just very similar to how I saw it in the reference photo. What really gave me a hard time was drawing the colors around this. So at around this point, I was still thinking that this color palette was going to evolve around very grayish yellows, and so that already being the color for her dress really made me adjust the whole background. I thought that this was gonna be the color that I was gonna do for the tree trunks. So after painting her outfit, it was hard for me to distance the colors of the trees behind her. And so it really set the tone for how I did the rest of the painting. After that was when I realized that I would have to lean more into the colors that the reference photo was originally, which really makes you think that those artists would know better than me. But yeah, after drawing that outfit, I just came back to the colors in the reference photo, and it really just made the whole thing a lot easier too. I was so happy when it finally came to drawing this background, just because the little featurette that I watched of the movie, they really took the time to show the artist's work. And I think his name is Ivan Earl. He really starts with the silhouette and the shape of the trees. I wish in my painting, I would showcase that more, but because again of how I formatted it and how I cropped this painting, you really can't see it that much. But he starts with the shape of the trees and then paints the textures on top of that. So I'm doing the same thing where I'm blocking the colors in. What I'm really looking at is how these trees would frame her and how they would shape her. So these colors I chose first are just enough to distance themselves from her, but also I don't want them to stand out too much. I still want to work in midtones from the start. And once I've done that, I was finally at the fun part, which is to draw these trees, which I just find so satisfying somehow. So you can see I started with the midtones and then I went with the black. And I really love how this technique works with gouache. I'm not really sure what paints they were using, but I have a feeling that they were using maybe designer's gouache just because of this, because it's very similar to how I think gouache works. It's really fun to do the background, especially in gouache. And these colors look very simple, but I actually think that I would have had a hard time had I done this with the Mia gouache, just because of how many shifts there are in the undertones to the background, while also still maintaining sort of this very similar value throughout most of it. I'm building up the details around it, so there's really so many shifts in the colors that I would put in, while also trying to not make them be that contrasty in values. So right here you can see me add that peachy yellow to some parts, and then I would do the same thing with the blue and greens too. So this background looks kind of very simple, but there's lots of times when I had to think out which colors would work together. You can see I'm also trying to shape out which colors won't and which ones would look too similar to each other. What I did enjoy much more was adding the textures in the tree trunks that are closer to her, just because I get to play around with my different brushes. And I just especially love this Kolinsky brush. It's so great for little paintings like this that have a lot of detail to them, because it really keeps its shape, and I think it's just perfect for gouache. But because of that, I do think that I went overboard with the textures that are supposed to be very far away, because I enjoyed painting with this brush so much and adding different colors and textures to the background. I sort of ended up with way too much detail and texture to the part of the background that is supposed to be far away from her. I do correct that later, but I can sort of see that right now, and it's very jarring, I think, in this piece. It's just too much all together and too close to each other. What I really loved about this process was that relative to my other videos, it was very straightforward, I would say. There are times when I would go back after painting the background, I would go back to her hair and some parts of her dress, but it's mostly just to finish them off and add detail to them. In most of my videos, I would go back and forth because I would try to correct my earlier mistakes, and I would try to see how all of these elements would work together, and sometimes that just requires adjustments and even retracing my steps. For this, it actually became pretty straightforward in that way, in that the process for this was very linear, I always say. it just felt like I knew what I was doing from the very start, even though I know that wasn't true, and but I really was just enjoying myself so much while I was painting this. Ironically, I think this part right here with the layered leaves that I'm trying to paint in, it turned out to be the weakest part of the painting, and I don't know if you guys have noticed, I've actually practiced this style so much, and yeah, it turned out to be my least favorite part of the painting. I just don't feel like it added too much. Or maybe I think that the brush that I was using was too fine, and the line work in here just became too thin, and it really affected the composition. But overall, I just wasn't as happy with this one as I was with the rest of the painting. One of the more important things that I did to this painting was actually to go back to the background that is behind the trees and go over that with a damp brush and just fade out those details. I really think before this, it was just too much. It was just too textured and you could just see them even though they were so far away. After I blurred that background out, it just felt more realistic. And also I feel like it reflected more of how it was in the movie. Also, blurring out that background really gave room for these branches right here that are just sneaking through above her. I was more happy with how these went compared to how the leaves behind her went, just because at this point I had a clearer idea of the colors that I needed to use, and so that layering technique really went smoother than how it was before. But yeah, I was more happy with how this one went than the one that I really practiced for behind her. So after that, this painting is mostly done. I just need to go back to some areas and polish some details, but yeah, that is it for this one. I really love how it turned out, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video too. Thank you guys for watching. The next one in the series is going to be Wednesday Addams, and I'm excited for that one too. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you to my patrons for supporting me, and I will be seeing you guys again soon.